a dance teacher and mother of one from West Yorkshire, endured a vicious assault at the hands of her boyfriend, Stephan Carr. The attack unfolded at Carr's Castleford residence on May the 5th of 2019, after he confessed to infidelity and accused Marchant of being in a new relationship as well. The allegation gave way to an argument between the two, which eventually escalated into 3 hours of relentless physical torture. CCTV cameras, which 28-year-old Carr had set up inside his home, captured the grisly show of sustained violence, including suffocation and strangulation. Carr ultimately hanged Marchant by the neck for 3 minutes, nearly killing her. The man also allegedly threatened her with a knife and told her that he was going to drive his van into the river and drown her. Concerned neighbors alerted the police, which, as law enforcement later pointed out, potentially saved Marchant's life. Following his subsequent arrest, Carr faced criminal charges for 4 assaults as well as an attempted assault, with 2 of the offenses linked to a previous romantic partner. He later pleaded guilty and was consequently sentenced to 11 years and 3 months behind bars. In the aftermath of her harrowing domestic experience, Marchant, at the time in her early 20s, admitted that she hadn't noticed any warning signs in Carr's behavior leading up to the attack. After the announcement of her ex's prison sentence, the young woman stated that the legal process didn't provide complete closure, though it relieved a substantial burden. Number 6. Anthony Leng. In January of 2018, 36-year-old Soka Kuan was found dead inside the home she shared with her husband and 2 children on Dorothy Street in Portland, Maine. 6 days after the woman's bullet-riddled body was discovered, her husband, Anthony Leng, was arrested for allegedly committing the violent homicide. Per court records, Leng had threatened to kill Kuan on multiple occasions leading up to the outburst of violence on January the 7th. That day, the couple returned home after watching a football game at a friend's house. Their younger son was in the living room when he suddenly heard a gunshot. Shortly after, his parents went into the kitchen together. The startling noise was followed by more gunshots. Then Kuan cried out and collapsed to the floor. The child later stated that he heard his father crying and believed he could smell gunpowder. He rushed into the kitchen to find his mother in a pool of blood next to a gun. His older brother subsequently fled from the house and contacted the authorities. According to police, Leng staged the crime scene to make his wife look like the aggressor and claimed that he'd shot her in self-defense. Nevertheless, he ultimately faced murder charges, to which he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the maximum possible punishment under his plea agreement. Number 5. Jake Corey. 27-year-old Amy McFarland was subjected to a prolonged, brutal attack in January of 2022 after her boyfriend accused her of cheating on him at their home in Failsworth, Greater Manchester, while McFarland was 36 weeks pregnant. Her partner, 30-year-old Jake Corey, flew into an unhinged rage after leveling accusations of infidelity. The man, who had a documented history of violence, reportedly slashed McFarland with a combat sword, warning her this is just the beginning. During the 4-hour onslaught that followed, Corey hit the victim with a hammer, strangled her, and threatened to remove her toenails with a pair of pliers. He also tied her to a radiator and left her there for hours, threatening further physical harm to both her and their unborn child. Ultimately, McFarland managed to escape the house by pretending to go into labor, which prompted Corey to call the emergency services. She sustained severe psychological trauma, later stating that the incident significantly impacted her mental health. During proceedings at Minshull Street Crown Court in Manchester, the court heard about the couple's relationship described as toxic and unhealthy. On multiple occasions in the past, Corey had falsely accused McFarland of being unfaithful. His jealous tendencies were only worsening leading up to his violent blow-up, which was reportedly triggered after he attended a baby scan with McFarland and grew paranoid that he wasn't the child's father. Corey, who had 35 prior offenses on his record, was sentenced to 6 years behind bars for false imprisonment, assault causing bodily harm, common assault, and criminal damage. The judge ordered him to remain on license upon his release until 2032. Number 4. Scotty Joe Fowler. In April of 2021, deputies from the Greenwood County Sheriff's Department in South Carolina were dispatched to a home on Lemon Tree Drive in Greenwood. Upon arrival, law enforcement found Scotty Joe Fowler holding a sheet to his girlfriend's head in an attempt to stop the bleeding from an apparent gunshot wound. The man told conflicting stories about what had transpired prior to the officers' arrival. Investigators spoke with another resident at the home who revealed that Fowler had put a gun to the victim's head and threatened her on multiple occasions. There were also several bullet holes in the wall of the bedroom that Fowler shared with his partner. The latter, who fortunately survived her injuries, told police that her boyfriend had abused her in the past, indicating that the shooting wasn't an accident. Fowler was charged with attempted murder and possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. In March of 2023, it was announced that a Greenwood County jury found the man guilty of both offenses after only 45 minutes of deliberation. Circuit Judge Frank Addy Jr. sentenced him to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and 5 years for the weapons charge, with the 2 terms ordered to run consecutively. Number 3. Azmat Esteso. In a horrifying incident in Kyrgyzstan, Azmat Esteso, a man convicted of severe crimes, subjected his ex-wife, Asel Nogiabieva, to a brutal attack on September the 20th of 2023. During the course of the assault, the man allegedly cut off the woman's nose and ears while their son was present. The attack followed accusations of infidelity that were leveled against the victim by Esteso, who knocked the mother of 2 unconscious while they were driving their kids to school near the capital city of Bishkek. Subsequently, the man brought them home and unleashed his prolonged assault, inflicting severe injuries on Asel. A neighbor alerted the police upon hearing distressing cries and witnessing a portion of Estebesov's violent outburst. Asel, who was left severely disfigured by the ordeal, required extensive medical treatment to survive her injuries. In the aftermath, she was reportedly seeking funds for reconstructive surgery in Turkey, which would cost nearly $50,000. Prior to the attack, Asel had given law enforcement evidence of her former partner's abuse, as well as multiple warnings about the danger that the man posed to her life. Nevertheless, Esteso was released from custody not long before his latest violent episode. He was detained by police pending further investigation and could face up to 12 years in jail if convicted of causing grievous bodily harm. Number 2. Sheree Spencer. Prison reform official Sheree Spencer was accused of carrying out a long-standing campaign of violence against her husband, Richard, throughout their relationship, which spanned 2 decades. The couple got married in Thailand shortly before Christmas 2009, and in the years that followed, they appeared to lead a happy life together. Sheree held down a high-ranking job with HM Prison and Probation Service and boasted about how she was close friends with the Prime Minister. However, behind closed doors, the woman allegedly made Richard's life a living hell. She subjected him to constant verbal beratement and physical beatings that would often leave him curled up on the floor in the fetal position, nursing bruises and scrapes. For years, Richard secretly recorded his wife's attacks, during which she bombarded him with obscenities and insults, and inflicted wounds that he would conceal with makeup before leaving the house. In an especially vile outburst, Sheree had even defecated on the floor, only to make her husband clean it up. She also beat the man over the head with a wine bottle, permanently disfiguring his ear. Once the woman's campaign of abuse was brought to light, she was arrested. Following proceedings at Hull Crown Court in February of 2023, Sheree was sentenced to 4 years in prison for what the judge described as the worst case of coercive control she'd ever seen. The case experienced renewed public interest in July of that year when the woman was transferred out of high-security HMP Newhall and moved to Arscombe Grange, open prison near York. Her husband expressed outrage at the move, stating that Sheree was receiving favorable treatment because of her high-ranking job. Around that time, Sheree's brother, Sean McCann was being prosecuted for trying to intimidate and bribe Richard into dropping the case. McCann allegedly offered over $100,000, then threatened to ruin Richard's life if Sheree went to prison. McCann's sentencing hearing at Stafford Crown Court hadn't been scheduled as of the latest developments. Stay tuned after number 1 if you'd also like to watch our previous episode about when roommates go wrong. It's tuned up straight after this. Number 1. The High Mana. In February of 2015, a Kuwaiti refugee by the name of High Mana was sentenced to 23 years in prison for the brutal murder of his wife at their home in Firth Park, Sheffield, in March of the previous year. The man subjected 28-year-old Sarah Al-Shorifito to a prolonged and ferocious attack using various weapons including metal bars, an electric drill, and screwdrivers. Mana even called a travel agent in the midst of his assault in order to plan his escape by fleeing the country. During the course of the attack, which lasted for about 2 hours, Mana bound Sarah's legs with tape and stuffed her body in a cupboard. He inflicted 270 wounds in total after taking a screwdriver to the victim's eye socket and tearing off a section of her scalp. During the resulting trial, the court heard that Sarah had endured ongoing abuse and violence from her husband after joining him in the UK. Isolated from her family in Kuwait, isolated from loved ones by her husband who'd confiscated her phone, Sarah reportedly suffered in silence, fearing the repercussions of reporting the abuse. The prosecution painted a grim picture of the woman's life, revealing that she was prohibited from attending English classes or shopping alone. Mana had a history of controlling and possessive behavior and believed that all of his wives were unfaithful. He admitted manslaughter due to diminished responsibility but denied murder. Nevertheless, the jury found him guilty of murder and he was given a prison term of 23 years as punishment. Number 8. Daria Alibi AA. During lockdown in April of 2020, a New York woman stabbed her roommate after she reportedly criticized her drinking habits. 31-year-old Tatiana Nazarenova and Daria Alibi AA, 4 years her junior, lived together in an Upper East Side apartment. Nazarenova, who owned the home, had been helping Alibi AA get established in the city. Years prior, they'd lived together in California, but had fallen out over the latter's drinking. Nazarenova still felt that they should look out for each other, since they were both Russian. Yet before long, Alibi AA's drinking again put a strain on their relationship. Nazarenova tried to get her to sober up by banning drinking in the shared areas. On April the 19th, she found a whiskey glass in the living room and poured it down the sink. This enraged Alibi AA to the point that she grabbed a kitchen knife and started stabbing the woman, whom she'd referred to in the past as her best friend. Nazarenova sustained cuts and puncture wounds to her torso, shoulder, arms, hands, and face. She even reportedly saw a piece of intestine sticking out of her abdomen. As she lay bleeding, Nazarenova feared she was going to die and begged her attacker to call the police. Alibi AA refused to do so and abandoned her. The victim managed to call for help on her cell phone and was taken to a hospital, where doctors saved her life. 9 days after the attack, Alibi AA was arrested for attempted murder and imprisoned at Rikers Island. Number 7. Joe Shellin. In December of 2018, an American woman was brutally murdered by her roommate at a student complex in the Netherlands. 21-year-old Sarah Pappenheim from Minnesota had met Joe Shellin, aged 23, while studying at an Erasmus University in Eindhoven. They formed a connection through a shared interest in music, became friends and eventually moved in together. Shellin was withdrawn and Pappenheim would refer to herself as his only friend. After about a year and a half of them living in the apartment, Shellin started exhibiting anger and intense mood swings. In the days leading up to Pappenheim's murder, he'd reportedly confessed to her that he was going to kill 3 people. She was concerned and contacted aid workers, who talked to Shellin but saw no immediate reason to intervene. On December the 12th, a few days before Pappenheim was supposed to return to Minnesota for Christmas, police were called to the apartment. They found the young woman in severe condition, as she'd been stabbed and cut numerous times. Efforts to save her proved fruitless, and she bled to death in the apartment. Following his arrest, Shellin confessed to killing Pappenheim but said that all he remembered about the incident was being angry with her. Specialists found that the man had lost touch with reality due to a combination of psychosis, autism, and schizophrenia. He was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 6 years in prison and institutionalized psychiatric treatment. Number 6. Anthony Mendes. In February of 2020, a Florida man accidentally shot his roommate while playing with a firearm. According to the police, who responded to the call in Kissimmee, 23-year-old Anthony Mendes was irresponsibly handling his weapon in the apartment he shared with Savannah Lee Threats. It discharged, and his roommate sustained a critical gunshot wound. Threats was already dead by the time police arrived on the premises. Mendes was charged with manslaughter, violation of probation, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. The nature of the man's priors is unclear, but considering the charges brought against him, he faced multiple years in prison. Number 5. Justin VanKirk. A 35-year-old Pennsylvania man beat his roommate to death in 2016 following a dispute over stolen beer. Justin VanKirk accused Charles Parker, his 58-year-old roommate, of taking some of his Keystone Ice beers without asking. Both men were described by neighbors as heavy drinkers. A fight broke out in Parker's bedroom, and the older man was punched several times in the face and head. Parker started to bleed from his mouth, and VanKirk, who reportedly didn't want his roommate's blood to stain the carpet, dragged him to the living room floor. VanKirk left him there and went to bed. He called 911 the following day when, upon returning home in the afternoon, found that Parker was still on the floor and no longer breathing. The man was pronounced dead at the scene, exhibiting bruising, swelling, and severe injuries to the back of the head. VanKirk was ultimately found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to house arrest and probation. Number 4. Zachary Penton. In August of 2016, 21-year-old Zachary Penton fatally shot his roommate in the Arizona home they were sharing. The victim was 41-year-old Daniel Garofalo. Based on his past social media posts, Penton had reportedly developed a firearm obsession. In June, in one of his Twitter posts, Penton expressed surprise at how easy it had been for him to purchase a gun. 2 days before he shot Garofalo, in one of his tweets, Penton claimed that he needed to move out before he viciously murdered his roommate. According to Penton's account of the shooting, Garofalo had burst into his room asking him to move out. The man then reportedly tackled him and took away his phone, which Penton claimed had caused him to fear for his safety. He reached under his pillow, pulled out a semi-automatic handgun, and shot him dead. Penton's legal representation argued self-defense and claimed that the tweets weren't an indication of premeditation. Penton eventually pled down to manslaughter from second-degree murder charges and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Number 3. Ricardo Medina Jr. In 2015, an actor best known for his role as one of the Power Rangers fatally stabbed his roommate with a Conan the Barbarian-type sword. Back in 2002, Ricardo Medina Jr. played Cole Evans, the Red Wild Force Ranger, on the popular series. Medina's career never really achieved mainstream success beyond the role, and in 2015 he was living in Green Valley, California, with roommate Joshua Sutter. On February the 1st, Medina and Sutter, both in their late 30s at the time, got into an argument involving Medina's girlfriend. After the men had come to blows, Medina and his girlfriend retreated to his bedroom. Sutter allegedly broke through the door, and it was then that Medina picked up the double-edged sword. He used the weapon to stab Sutter, who died of his injuries after arriving at the hospital. Medina ultimately pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was given a 6-year sentence. Number 2. James Yugo. In 2014, a Tampa man was charged with manslaughter after beating his roommate to death following an argument involving a chicken foot. After staying at a homeless shelter, Benjamin Calderon moved in with James Yugo. Calderon hoped to work as an armed security officer and was saving money for a license. The men, both in their 50s, had gotten along at first. Then on February the 15th, Calderon grabbed a chicken foot from a skillet where Yugo was cooking. Furious, Yugo started relentlessly pummeling him with his fists. Calderon sustained severe trauma and succumbed to internal bleeding. Yugo confessed to beating his roommate to death following his arrest and was charged with manslaughter. Florida police records revealed he'd been arrested 19 times in the past. Calderon's brother, who was deeply affected by the incident, told a media outlet that no one deserves to die over a chicken foot. Number 1. Jeffrey Dahmer. Before becoming one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history, Jeffrey Dahmer enlisted in the U.S. Army and trained as a medical specialist. By the time he'd joined the military, Dahmer had already killed a man in Ohio and openly boasted about it when drunk. But his fellow soldiers didn't believe him. From 1979 to 1981, he was stationed in West Germany, and his roommate at the time was Billy Capshaw. Years later, Capshaw would detail the nightmarish time he spent with Dahmer, while describing him as a sociopath, a psychopath, and a narcissist. Soon after they'd started living together, Dahmer began to completely control Capshaw. He beat and tortured him. He'd strike him across the joints with a metal bar from a bed apparatus. Capshaw learned not to scream or cry during the abuse, as it only made Dahmer hit him harder. He wasn't taken seriously by his superiors whenever he tried to complain. Capshaw was repeatedly drugged and tied to the bed, while Dahmer controlled the only key to the room. Capshaw stated that he wanted to kill Dahmer in his sleep and then take his own life. He subsequently regretted not having killed him, in light of the monster he would become. Dahmer was discharged from the military in 1981 due to his alcohol abuse. A few years later, he began his killing spree, claiming at least 16 victims, with many of his later murders involving cannibalism and body parts being preserved as trophies. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get married to a person you end up hating or be lonely for the rest of your life? Let us know in the comments section below.